Evolving Zac Robinson's offense will put the Falcons on the fastest path to the playoffs.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. the Jolly Green Giant, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. And I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for almost 2 decades, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP. Still going strong on this illustrious podcast. Been podcasting for well over a decade, almost 15 years. And I appreciate each and every one of you that has been going strong with me, whether you were that one person listening to the podcast almost 15 years ago, or you're one of many people that are now discovering this podcast in the last 15 seconds. So I appreciate all of you that are everydayers. That means you make this podcast the first listen each and every day. And all you got to do to become an everydayer is subscribe and follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today, we are talking about all the ways that Zac Robinson, the Falcons offensive play caller, can improve their offense. We'll talk about, Pitts' lack of involvement in certain ways is symptomatic of the larger issues with this offense. We'll talk about how former Tampa Bay Buccaneers offensive coordinator, now Jacksonville Jaguars head coach Liam Coen, basically runs the version of the Falcons, or ran the version of the Falcons offense that we want to see from this team in 2025, as just sort of part of a larger question where if and when this Falcon team gets improvement on offense in this 2025 season, will it become from running basically a better version of the same offense they ran in 2024, or are they going to diversify and evolve their offense as their path to improvement? And we'll start that conversation looking at their personnel tendencies last year, where according to SumerSports.com, the Falcons ran 86% out of their offense out of 11 personnel, which was the most in the NFL. 11 personnel refers to those 3 wide receiver sets. And for those of you not familiar with personnel groupings, that first number in that number refers to the number of running backs, and the second number is the number of tight ends. So 11 personnel is 1 running back, 1 tight end, thus 3 wide receiver sets, because you're subtracting 5 minus the number of running backs and tight ends. 12 personnel would be 2 tight end sets, 1 running back. 22 personnel would be 2 running backs, 2 tight ends. If you ever see 6-11, that's basically the 6 refers to extra offensive lineman, the 6 offensive lineman essentially functioning as a tight end. So now that you guys understand that, basically the Falcons only had 3 games where they weren't primarily or exclusively running 11 personnel last year. That was against the Steelers, the Vikings, and the Raiders last year, where they only ran 11 personnel about 51% of the time in those 3 games combined. But outside of those 3 games, whether we're talking about the 11 games with Kirk Cousins or the 3 games with Michael Penix, 92% of their plays across either one of those sets was 11 personnel. And the fact that they were starting to run more 2 tight end sets in those last 2 starts of Kirk, and then immediately switch back to running that 11 personnel once Penix got in the lineup, to me kind of speaks volumes to what this offense wants to be. And I think my expectation is that we'll see once again primarily an 11 personnel offense. And so again, it begs that question: or is this offense going to remain the same and potentially run 85-90% out of their offense out of 3 wide receiver sets, or are they going to try to sprinkle in a little bit more diversity with their personnel groupings? And is that something that's a matchup specific issue, right? Like, let's say, for instance, they run 11 personnel 80% of the time this year. Is that because we get a half dozen games based off of matchups where they try to diversify and run something different? Or is it something where if they run 80% this year, it's because they consistently run 80%, and that leaves that extra 20% is basically a dozen or so plays where the Falcons are diversifying their personnel on a semi-weekly basis? And so, it begs the question of how effective are they going to be if they go away from 11 personnel? That's, to me, a big question if they are going to evolve this offense and diversify their offense, because at the end of the season with Penix, and the one sort of wrinkle that Zac Robinson brought was running more 2 running back sets with the 21 personnel. Right, that second running back being Tyler Algier and Bijan Robinson sharing the field instead of a fullback. Right, 6% of the Falcons' plays in those final 3 games under Penix, they utilized 21 personnel. Prior to that, it was only 2% of their plays, and that's why you kind of heard me only half jokingly sort of say that Zac Robinson desperately wants to have a fullback in his offense, but refuses to have a fullback in his offense. And I thought that was an effective tool in Robinson's arsenal that I thought was a little underutilized that we did see towards the end of the season, because when you can get Algier and Robinson on the field, not only can you do interesting wrinkles in terms of run concepts, and we'll talk more about that when we talk about Liam Coen's offense later, but it also maybe allows you to feature Bijan Robinson more as a pass catcher, because now you can leave Algier in the pass protect and use Bijan's mismatch ability on the outside as a more of a receiving threat, and that you can't necessarily use because as it's not a bad thing, but one of the downsides of Bijan being such a good pass protector is that he often, if he's staying in the pass protect, he's not being able to be utilized as a pass catcher. And so I'm not going to say one is better than the other. I think the benefit when it comes to running 3 wide receiver sets was that it definitely improved the Falcons' run attack, right? That typically defenses, when they see 11 personnel, 3 wide receiver sets, they deploy nickel against that. That usually leads to softer boxes where you only have 6 defenders in the box. And when you have 6 blockers, 5 offensive linemen plus a tight end, that running back being the 7th guy is essentially unaccounted for the defense until basically a safety 5 to 10 yards down the field. It has to sort of make that tackle. And now one of the ways that defenses counter that is by playing cover 3 against a team like the Falcons, by dropping that second safety into the box. And that leaves them vulnerable to attack, especially from this offense. One of the reasons why the Shanahan-McVay offenses have taken the league by storm over the last 5 to 8 years is primarily because they're really good at carving up cover 3. It's one of the reasons why, while cover 3 remains the most popular coverage in the NFL, teams have been going away from it over the last 5 or so years, in part due to the proliferation of these Shanahan-McVay offenses. And it's not a coincidence that the Falcons arguably had their best games last year against defenses that majored in cover 3. Their 4 highest scoring outputs of the last season came against Carolina twice and Tampa Bay twice. And those 2 teams were 3rd, Carolina, and 4th, respectively, in Tampa Bay in terms of usage of cover 3 last year. And one of the issues the Falcons faced last year when they weren't facing cover 3 teams is they really struggled against teams that weren't necessarily running that cover 3, right? The average usage of cover 3 last year was about 36% of the time. And the Falcons had 10 games last year against teams that ran cover 3 an above average amount than that 36%. And in those games, they averaged about 25 points per game. But against non-cover 3 major teams, they only averaged about 16 points per game. And that's the difference of basically being a top 10 offense, like the 9th best scoring offense in the league, and basically being the 30th, a bottom 3 offense. And so there was a big dichotomy based in, and it's not to say that that's the only reason why the Falcons offense struggled. Football has too many variables to just basically say it's one thing, but certainly this offense was at its most effective against defenses that majored in cover 3 and really struggled against defenses that didn't. And hopefully that's going to be an area of improvement, because I don't know how many opportunities they're going to get against defenses that major in cover 3. Right, that outside of those 4 games that they have against Carolina and Tampa Bay, assuming that their defenses aren't going to change drastically from what they've been running the last couple of years, the only other teams that the Falcons have against teams that were above average in cover 3 usage last year, again, we don't know. There's been some defensive coordinators shuffling, but based off of what those defensive coordinators or those head coaches were in their previous stints from last year, the only other 3 teams that are above average cover 3 teams are the Rams, the Cardinals, and the Commanders. And so potentially we're talking about 10 or more of their games against teams that typically don't play cover 3. And so we need to see more than a bottom 3 offense for this team in order to reach their heights. And so, this team really struggled. Like their highest scoring output against a non-cover 3 team, at least on offense, like the Saints game in week 4, was one, but you remember they scored 26 points in that game. 14 of those points came on special teams and defense, right? The other next game was the Cowboys game, and the Cowboys were basically average, right? The league average was 35.8%. The Cowboys were 35.3% cover 3. So even then, like they were a below average team, but basically average. So it basically, again, begs that question that we asked at the top of the show. If and when the Falcons offense improves, is it going to be because they change their offense, or will they be the same thing, but just hope to be a better version of that team? And again, I think evolving the offense is probably the path. And we'll talk about one of the reasons why, because all they have to do if they do want to evolve their offense is just look at the team that won the NFC South as sort of their template for success in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And we'll break that down as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. So, guys, we pump a lot of Penix here on the podcast, and Viagra and Cialis can help you do that. But if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Rugiet Ready. Rugiet Ready is the next gen prescription treatment designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow. Unlike the usual pills that can take hours, Rugiet's 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue and kicks in fast and on average in just 15 minutes. And the effects can last up to 36 hours, so you can stay confident and in control when the moment is right. So get your pump on by heading to rugiet.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL to get 15% off today. That's RUGIET.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but are not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, or manufacturing review. Please visit Rugiet website for full safety information. So, as I said, I think Zac Robinson only has to really look at the 2024 Bucs as sort of a template of what his offense could potentially be, right? Liam Coen being another Sean McVay disciple and did such an outstanding job in his first year as a play caller in Tampa Bay that he wound up getting a head coaching gig in Jacksonville. We'll see what he turns out to be as a head coach. But, you know, when we talk about the Falcons, their best chance of making the playoffs is producing a top 5 offense. Well, that's what the Bucs were last year across the board, right? They were 4th in scoring. They were 7th in DVOA. They were 5th in EPA per play last year. And Zac Robinson and Liam Coen basically went to the same alma mater, right? The Sean McVay School of Coaching, right? 3 of the 5 years that, you know, Zac Robinson was in LA for 5 years. In 3 of those years, Liam Coen was on that coaching staff. And right. And they had many of the same jobs, right? In 2019, Zac Robinson was the assistant quarterbacks coach and Liam Coen was the assistant wide receiver coach. The next year they switched jobs. Coen was the assistant quarterbacks coach and Robinson was the assistant wide receivers coach. In 2022, Sean McVay was obviously the play caller, but Liam Coen officially had the offensive coordinator title. And Zac Robinson was the passing game coordinator and quarterbacks coach that year. And so you had that 1-2-3 hierarchy with McVay at the top, Coen in the middle, and Robinson at the bottom in terms of, you know, who was responsible for game planning those offenses. And so essentially they speak the same language. And it's not to sit here and say that, you know, all Zac Robinson has to do is just copy, you know, the Liam Coen offense and pull a Soldier Boy or pull a Drake, I should say, and, you know, copy Soldier Boy, you know, word for word, bar for bar or whatever. But like there's inspiration that he could take. And I know you guys are like, play the clip, Aaron. I'm like, I'm not going to play the clip.
Drake!
Or him.
Drake! Drake!
Yes!
Word for word, bar for bar. So again, I think one of the things I think Coen did a really good job is he had a more diverse offense. And the Falcons are one of those teams that are kind of a team that's kind of good at one thing. And we talk all the time about in the NFL, you know, the goal is to be good at multiple things, right? Being good at 2 things is better than being good at 1 thing. Being good at 3 things is better than being good at 2 things, because you can, you know, whether we're talking about the run versus the pass or, you know, offense versus defense or whatever, you know, the best teams do multiple things well because defense is hard, football is hard, and the more that you can throw at defenses that they don't know what's coming is going to make it even harder. Like defenses are already at a disadvantage because they're reacting to what offenses are doing. And if they have no clue what's coming based off of your personnel, based off of your looks and all these various things, then it becomes infinitely harder for those defenses to play. And, you know, we've talked a lot about when it comes to the Falcons being good at one thing. We talked about that in the context of their run concepts with their reliance on the outside zone. We'll talk later, you know, talking about, you know, that they actually are good at other run concepts. They just don't run those concepts, but we'll circle back to that later. But you can see this reflected in their personnel usage. As we saw last year, the Falcons were primarily 11 personnel team, right? And they were 7th best in the NFL last year in EPA per play when they were running those 3 wide receiver sets. Their next 2 highest personnel groupings were the 12 personnel with 2 tight ends or the 21 personnel with 2 running backs. And they ranked 25th and 24th respectively in EPA out of those formations. And you compare them with the Bucs, right? The Bucs ran 11 personnel 71% of the time, was the 5th highest usage in the NFL, but they ranked 5th in EPA when they ran 11 personnel. And 12 personnel, they ranked 7th in EPA. 21 personnel, 5th in EPA. 13 personnel with those 3 tight end sets, they were 5th in EPA. And so basically it didn't matter what personnel grouping the Bucs were in, they essentially were a top 5 offense regardless of what they were doing. So again, they were able to throw multiple things at defenses, even though they weren't necessarily majoring in all those other personnel groupings. And then you look at some of the other things that we're talking about where Robinson can draw inspiration from Liam Coen. The 2 running back usage, right? The Bucs used a lot of 2 running back sets without a fullback, right? They ran 6%, just like the Falcons did in the final 3 games throughout the entire season. The Bucs ran 6% of their plays out of 21 personnel. And in fact, that was the most usage of 21 personnel across the league for any team that did not have a fullback on the roster. And they finished 5th in EPA per rush in those situations, 3rd in EPA per pass, doing a lot of creative things with misdirection. I remember that week 3 game against the Broncos that I watched in the lead up to the Falcons week 5 matchup against the Bucs, and Bucky Irvin had a couple of really good runs in that game with like an end around and some motioning with him and Rachaad White on the field at the same time. And you talk about the diversity of the run game. The Bucs were basically the worst run game in the NFL in 2023, and were like a top 10 run game in 2024. And a big reason for that is Bucky Irvin's introduction to the offense and him being very good last year. But another part of that was they were a much more diverse run game in 2024. They were primarily an inside zone duo run team in 2023. That was their primary usage, but they basically tripled the amount of outside zone and power concepts that they ran in 2024, and that led to a lot of their success. Their play action passing with the Bucs, right? They weren't using play action a ton last year, 24th in usage last year, but they were basically a top 10 offense when they did use it, whether you're judging based off of EPA per play, yards per attempt, passer rating, etc. Top 10 across the board under play action. So I think there's a lot of things that Zac Robinson can learn from Liam Coen, and going back to the rushing efficiency and the diversity of the run game, right? We talk about the Falcons majoring in outside zone. They ran at about 52%, which was by far the most usage of outside zone in the NFL last year, according to ftnfantasy.com. And the NFL average in terms of outside zone usage was about 21%. So the Falcons ran outside zone about 2.5 times more than the average NFL team. And it's understandable why the Falcons majored in it. That's what they've been built to be. They're an outside zone rushing team they've been running that offense since 2015, since Kyle Shanahan's arrival. They built their offensive line to run that. They're very effective, 1st in success rate on outside zone, 6th in EPA per rush on outside zone, according to FTN Fantasy. But they were also efficient running other concepts. They were 1st or 2nd in success rate when they were running inside zone or duo, right? But they ranked 30th in inside zone usage and 22nd in duo usage. And, it's not to say, hey, you got to abandon the outside zone run. It's your best pitch. Continue to major in it. But, they still would have led the NFL in outside zone usage if they only ran it like 35% of the time instead of 52% of the time. And the difference between 52% run and 35% run is essentially like 5 runs per game. And so that's all you got to diversify is sprinkle in 5 different run concepts than necessarily outside zone. And all of a sudden you're more in line with what the rest of the league is doing. And you can be, again, good at multiple things as opposed to just good at one thing, right? And so you wonder if the Falcons are going to do that, though, because you go back to what some of the comments that Zac Robinson made when he was on the Check at the Mic podcast earlier this offseason. And one of the things that he was talking about was Penix's mobility in relation to the play action passing game. And at least from my perspective, you would only be talking about Penix's mobility when it comes to play action passing because you're thinking about running a lot more bootleg off of the outside zone run concepts that you are sort of the natural that you run. The play action concept that you run after those outside zone run concepts. And so it makes you wonder again, are they just going to double down on what they were and be that outside zone team and just say, we're going to be a better version of that because now we have Penix under center, or are we going to diversify, evolve, and switch things up? And again, if they do decide to switch it up, I don't think there's a better option for Zac Robinson, or at least obviously Sean McVay would probably be the best option. Kyle Shanahan would be a great option to steal from. But, Liam Coen is one of the best options that they could have to steal from, given that they speak the same language. And he showed what a diverse offense looks like. And, another thing that Liam Coen did a really good job of last year was getting his tight end involved in the offense. And that's been a frequent criticism of the Zac Robinson offense when it comes to Kyle Pitts. And again, it gets to the core of this question. Are you just going to switch it up and get Kyle Pitts more involved? Or are you just going to double down and just basically say, hey, Kyle, you're still going to be an afterthought in the offense? And we'll talk about that as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So during the summer, you guys know that finances can be a little tight when you're trying to figure out, how to corral these kids, get them on vacation and whatnot. And you sometimes check your bank account and you're like, where did all my money go in between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment? It's easy to lose track of all those funds. And that's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. Whether you're looking to track your accounts, investments, or spending all in one place, you can even also plan your long-term goals as well as your short-term goals so that you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money by using code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com, and you'll get 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. So one of my core beefs with Zac Robinson is the fact that Kyle Pitts was too often an afterthought in this Falcons offense in 2024. Outside of that 6-game stretch from weeks 5 through week 10, where Kyle Pitts' usage was good, he was kind of an afterthought in this offense. And during that 6-game stretch, Kyle Pitts' target share was about 16%, which we want to see throughout the entire season, for just a third of the season. And during that 6-game stretch, that was when the Falcons got a lot of explosive plays from Kyle Pitts to factor in that usage. It's also not a coincidence that was the stretch of games where the Falcons offense was probably its best all year long and its most consistent all year long. Essentially, they were top 8 in offense and scoring points. They were 3rd in EPA per play. They had the same number of explosive plays, those 20-plus yard plays per game as the Ravens, who were the most explosive offense in the NFL last year, averaging about 5 explosive plays per game. That's what the Falcons averaged across that 6-week span. And again, when we talk about Kyle Pitts getting more involved in this offense, no one's sitting here saying that we need to feature Kyle Pitts and run the offense through him, but getting him more involved is going to be better. Again, we know that this offense is the big 3. Bijan Robinson, Drake London, Darnell Mooney, in that order, are who the top 3 breadwinners of the offense are. But again, going back to, it's better to be good at multiple things than it is the one thing, right? What's better? What makes it harder for defenses to defend? 3 really good playmakers or 4 really good playmakers? Obviously, the answer is 4. And so, when it comes to the tight end usage, similar to what we saw with Kevin O'Connell back in 2023 when Justin Jefferson missed a lot of games, one of the things that Kevin O'Connell did was, TJ Hawkinson became the primary target in Minnesota, and Kevin O'Connell's from that Sean McVay school. And we saw something similar happen to Cade Otton this past year, the Bucs tight end, when he had to step up and be the number 1 option for that 3-game stretch when Mike Evans was out of the lineup and Chris Godwin had been hurt for a couple of weeks at that point in time. That included that week 8 game against the Falcons where Cade Otton was the Bucs leading receiver. He was the Bucs leading receiver across those 3 games. And the Bucs remained a successful offense despite having to kind of feature their tight end. And one of the ways that they tried to feature their tight end, Kevin O'Connell did it with TJ Hawkinson and Liam Coen did with Cade Otton, was, throwing a screen to their tight ends. They threw a healthy amount of screens. And the Falcons are the only team in the NFL last year that did not run a single tight end screen all season long. And the reason why I point that out is because, like, similar to what we're talking about with the Falcons running outside zone 2.5 times the rate at the rest of the NFL, while the rest of the NFL is moving away from outside zone, the Falcons are like, we're triple dipping on outside zone. Or when we talk about Terry Fontenot's draft record and him being a maverick and a rebel and all that sort of things, like, basically the point is when the rest of the league is zigging, the Falcons like the zag, and there's certainly value to being an innovator, to being the outlier, but the ways that the Falcons typically choose to do that, I don't think has proven that effective. And this is one of those examples with the screen game to the tight ends, right? And it's not to sit here and say, oh, Kyle Pitts is going to be a beast in the screen game. He's probably going to be mid. But guess what? Cade Otton and TJ Hawkinson aren't anything more than mid when it comes to tight end screens. But it's just an easy button that your coordinator can dial up to get your tight end more involved in the offense. And again, it's not to say, man, if we just incorporate more tight end screens, it's going to be the key to unlocking the full potential of this offense. But the fact that you didn't run a single one in 17 games last year, to me, is just a symptom of the lack of creativity in this offense. And especially when you compare it to other offenses that are in this McVay tree, whether we're talking about Kevin O'Connell's or Liam Coen, that integrate a healthy amount of tight end screens in their offense. Sean McVay did that throughout Zac Robinson's time there, right? Which tight end had the most tight end screens in 3 out of the 5 years where Zac Robinson was an assistant in LA? It was Tyler Higbee, the Rams tight end. And so, to me, again, this notion of the tight end screen is kind of tied to the big question. Are the Falcons going to double down on what they did before, just trust that Michael Penix is just going to do a better job of elevating that offense? Or are they going to grow, expand, and evolve and diversify what they're doing to do more than what they were doing? And if it's not clear at this point, like, my stance is I think I would prefer this team to diversify. I think, again, if you're going to bet, that simply Michael Penix is just going to be better than Kirk Cousins, again, I don't think that's a bad bet or anything like that. It just seems like the same bet that the Falcons have been making for the last couple of years, which is, hey, we just need to swap out the quarterback, and that's going to magically solve all of our other problems, and everything else about this team is fine, except for the quarterback. And again, you can certainly make the argument, as we have made the last couple of years, that the biggest issue on the team is the quarterback, but I don't think it's the only issue on the team. And hopefully I've illustrated, there's still a lot of room to grow and improve for this offense. And again, whether that's diversifying their personnel, diversifying their run concepts, adding more play action passing, or God knows, just running one stinking tight end screen all season long. And so I think all you have to do is look at other play callers that come from the same coaching tree, come from the same school as Zac Robinson, whether it's Sean McVay, Kevin O'Connell, Liam Coen, as running better versions of this offense. And that's part of the reason why I've been so down on Zac Robinson, because I watched Sean McVay's offense last year and Kevin O'Connell's offense last summer and thinking, oh, we're going to run some of the same concepts and it's going to be the same. And probably this summer, I'm going to watch a lot of Liam Coen's offense, hoping that Zac Robinson's going to borrow from that. And to me, basically, those guys run a good version of what this offense looks like. And it's not to say Zac Robinson's running a bad version of this offense, but it is a lesser version of this offense. Some might even say it's an unseasoned version of this offense. Just let's get a little smoked paprika and some onion powder up in this piece, right? So it's why, I know there are Falcon fans that feel some type of way about, people, projecting the Vikings to be good this year, despite having, all these questions about JJ McCarthy, and feeling some type of way is like, why isn't Michael Penix getting that love? He's shown more than JJ McCarthy. Because the reason, guys, is people aren't betting on JJ McCarthy. They're betting on Kevin O'Connell. They're betting on the play caller, not the quarterback. And so the question, of course, with the Falcons so far, as we sit here and pump, right, we're betting on the quarterback. But to me, the real path is not only the quarterback elevates the ceiling of this offense, right, in terms of what you want, what you've already doing. Yes, Michael Penix, make it better. But then also we want to see Zac Robinson diversify and run new things. And then Michael Penix, of course, being able to execute that as well. So we'll see what we get. Obviously, we'll have an answer to this question 6 months from now. And obviously it will be a big topic that we'll be breaking down on probably a weekly basis here on Locked On Falcons. So, of course, continue to check out the show and, talking about, some of the things that Kevin O'Connell and Sean McVay did. We did a breakdown last summer for the Locked On Falcons Insiders, looking at some of the film of what those offenses were doing and some of the things that the Falcons really didn't start running until like December. I was sitting here, I did that breakdown in July and was like, oh, this is what the offense is going to be from the start. And we didn't really get to that until at the very end of the season. Again, that's the thing that gives you hope. You just got just a sprinkling of it, just a sprinkling of seasoning, right? The little Salt Bay from Zac Robinson at the very end of the season when Penix took over. And that gives you the hope and optimism that we're going to see more than just a couple of sprinkles. He's going to be out here with, fistful of spices and seasoning to get this offense to the next level. But one of the things I plan on doing for the Locked On Falcons Insiders, we'll probably be looking at some film of Liam Coen's offense, looking at some of these two running back concepts, looking at how they utilized Cade Otton during that 3-game stretch when they didn't have Mike Evans, as ways to, hey, this is how you can feature a tight end that is certainly more talented than Kyle Pitts. But it's like, okay, well, if Cade Otton can do this stuff, clearly Kyle Pitts is capable of doing this stuff. It's not a skill issue. Maybe it's a want to, whether it's the play caller or the tight end when we talk about, but that's going to be something that's in store in the coming weeks for the Locked On Falcons Insider. If you want to become a Locked On Falcons Insider, you can do so by hitting that link in the description below at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnFalcons. It is a 14-day free trial and then $4.99 a month. You can also get access to that breakdown I did last summer. And hopefully we will revisit some of that stuff to sort of see like, oh, okay, we're going to get what I thought we were going to get year one of Zac Robinson. Now we're going to get in year two, better late than never, as they say. So that, along with all my, draft class breakdowns, as well as many of the extended all 22s that we'll be doing, as well as, you can get unfettered access to yours truly as well. It's basically like, you can just text me at 2 a.m. and say, hey, you up? I was going to say something out of pocket. I'm not going to say, given our sponsor Rugiet, but I just got this Rugiet. Aaron, what's up? So again, I'm not saying that you have to do that. In fact, I would be very upset if you did do that. But hey, if you're paying for it, you can do whatever you want. So it's a free country, as they say, at least for now. So that is all the perks you get. I know I do a terrible job selling the Locked On Falcons Insider program, right? Feet picks and 2 a.m. texts and whatnot. But again, that's not the draw of being a Locked On Falcons Insider. That's just one of the perks of being a Locked On Falcons Insider. And if you're new to the podcast and you don't know what I'm talking about, welcome to the show. We get out of pocket here on Locked On Falcons. So hit that link in the description if you want to become a Locked On Falcons Insider and get access to all of the above. And continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen. We may be talking a little bit more about Michael Penix, speaking of pumping, tomorrow, and talking about what was the thing that I said I want to do more research on. I can't remember what that thing was. Anyway, but whatever, we'll get into some stuff. I literally talked about it yesterday on the podcast, and I don't remember what it was. I was doing in terms of what a typical quarterback looks like over his first 20 starts. So that may be something that's in store for you on tomorrow's episode. So continue to listen to Locked On Falcons by subscribing and following for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And for your second listen, not only check out the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast, but why not check out Locked On Hawks, right? First round picks, Brad Rowland, get you guys geared up for Wednesday's NBA draft, lottery and whatnot. So Locked On Hawks is going to have you covered, all the previews and reactions to whatever the Hawks do in the NBA draft. It is all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every